Always delighted to have a chat with my next guest on the show. He's so interesting. He's the founder of Connect Hearing. He's an audiologist. James Clay, welcome back to Late Lunch.
Gerry, thank you very much.
Not at all. I want to start with something that's maybe a little off-centre.
Okay.
We have a question in from a listener about a child 6 to 7 years of age with profuse wax coming from their ears.
Okay.
Is it something to be concerned about, or what should they do?
It's a very natural thing, because really earwax is really just dead skin and oil, and look, the skin starts growing at the eardrum, moves its way out slowly and very, very slowly, and then it dies in the latter third of the ear canal, and that flakes off the sebaceous gland, exude the oil. That makes earwax, and generally it just dumps out, it just falls out. But you'll find it in children that it really gathers, and the worst thing really you could do is go in and try and scoop it out, because you'll push much more in than you'll ever take out. You need either the equipment or the tools, to actually take it out. It has to be done properly.
So you would say go to a professional and have that done?
Absolutely. First protocol is your GP. Get the GP, because what looks bad in the outside of the ear canal may not be blocking the ear canal itself, so it's only cosmetic. It's nothing more than just wiping it, like your nose running. That's not a problem. You
told me here one time before to stop cleaning my ears.
Yes.
And I have stopped cleaning. I've never cleaned my ears since you told me there, and it has had no adverse effect on me.
No, it won't. Very often it just gets into a person's head that they need to actually clean it out. When in fact they don't. You know, it's a very natural product. And again, if we just think about it, if we needed to take the wax out of our ears, by the time a child, an infant, would be 3, 6 or 12 months old, it would be deaf. And we all know that's not the case.
Yes.
So therefore, leave it well enough alone. It's well enough designed. Of course, there are always anomalies.
Yes.
There will always be, but it does it itself.
Now, hearing is a very precious thing. It's only when you lose it you understand how precious it is, and you know, this is your business. But in today's world, with so many people with these headphones in, you meet them all over the place, and you can actually, if you're walking by people at times, you wonder, God almighty, to hear the noise of that. Are you seeing the effects of this?
We do see it. It's difficult without the data to know where the increase is, but we can only take it from a global point of view. The CDC, the Centre of Disease Control in the States, they did and they published some research recently that say that up to 24%, so almost a quarter of young people 17 to 30, will have a hearing loss because they're listening to personal sound players, iPhones, whatever it is. They're listening to them at high levels and for prolonged periods of time.
So this is just in leisure, in the course of life and day. It's not in a job where, a noisy job or anything like that. No. It's just going about our daily lives.
See, if we look at it back a few generations ago, the noise-induced hearing loss was brought about by industry. That's now flipped. Excuse me, it's now flipped to recreational. So there was also a study released at the beginning of this century, just about 2005 thereabouts, that said that recreational noise, so that's pubs, clubs, that thing, 3 times louder than they were in the mid-80s. And that's a function of better amplification systems, more speakers about the place. Years ago, if you remember, in the 80s, you go into a pub, there's a TV above the bar, that's where the sound emanated from. Now you go in, if there's 1 or 5 televisions, it's piped throughout the room.
And that is damaging your hearing. And you go out on a night out, yourself, and you're shouting at people across the noise.
It's very antisocial. When you actually think on it, and it was one of the benefits shortly after lockdown, whenever it was mandated that all pubs and restaurants had to have the background, the ambient sounds at a low level, and that was to stop the propulsion of COVID from one part of a restaurant or pub to another. People could actually talk in a very normal way, and they had the ambient music in the background, and it was comfortable. But just slowly and slowly, that's been turned up and turned up. and we're back to shouting at people again.
You sit here today with us in LMFM radio in a radio station. Look at me with these heads on, and it's part and parcel of what we do every day. I've had my hearing tested quite recently, and it's fine. You know what I mean? And thank God it is like that as well. But it's constant use of this stuff. Now, this is not at a very high level.
It's the level. It is all about the level. It's not. Of course, our hearing is the only sense that's working 24 hours a day. Like whenever you're sleeping, your ears are switched on. The amygdala in the brain is keeping you safe. It's making sure. So, if 2:00 in the afternoon, someday you hear a thud in the kitchen. Well, you just think it's somebody dropped something. 2:00 in the morning, you hear a thud in the kitchen. Bang, your ears are there. That's the guard. So they're working 24 hours a day. And again, it's the level that you put them on, that sound pressure level that you put on them.
A lot of music DJs, you know what I'm talking about, are now at ferocious levels because their hearing has been impacted and impaired by,
absolutely. And if you look at the I saw Steve Winwood do a session in the BBC studios back maybe about 5 or 10 years ago, and he was wearing hearing aids, took them out and he left them on his keyboard, put on his cans, played his music, took them back off and put the hearing aids back in again. Like that's inevitable.
Yes.
That amount of noise rattling through your head.
Yeah.
It does damage.
Talk to me about what you do, because in Connect Hearing, you are there to help people who have difficulties with the hearing. Hearing aids and the wearing of aids and that, it can really transform somebody's life, can't it?
Absolutely. And one of the things where people get a hearing test, that really tells you what sound from the outside reaches the auditory cortex. There is a whole story behind that people don't and are not aware of. Speech processing, speech discrimination. I remember a number of years ago, it was the year before COVID, there was a young girl who was at secondary school come in. Her hearing test, there was nothing wrong with it. She was well within normal parameters, but she still had difficulty amongst noise. It transpired that she had an auditory processing disorder. So we test not just hearing, but we also test listening, because most people don't have a difficulty in a quiet environment. It's when they get into some level of background noise they struggle. And that's also a test that we do. And because we work with about 7 different manufacturers, we have a wide range, and they all use different algorithms. And we know which manufacturer suits which person best. Without fear or favour, we'll choose whichever suits the patient best.
It's a very important thing, and I'm just thinking here now, I do struggle. If I go into a noisy environment out socially, I find it very hard to hear people.
See, we would need to see what your speech and noise score would be like.
Yes.
And that's something we test routinely.
I'd be interested in having that done.
Yeah, absolutely, anytime.
Yeah, just because now you've made me curious, and I'm just thinking, I can't hear anybody when I'm out socially if there's any level of noise in the background.
Yeah.
And that now you've got me thinking really about it. Come back to children, and we talked about the wax issue and that. You often grommets. What?
Yeah, it's a design fault with the human head. Okay, whenever the human head was being designed, they had forgotten something. From infancy up to about puberty, the head is quite small and round. And those eustachian tubes from the middle ear to the nasopharynx, the back of the throat, they lie in a very flat way. Sometimes they get, want of a better word, gunk. It's mucosal larynx in the back of the nasopharynx, and they stop the eustachian tube from opening. Therefore, the middle ear doesn't aerate properly. It causes a negative pressure, and it's what it would be termed as non-suppurative otitis media. And that's this recurring, what appears an infection with a child. It's just that it's not being aerated properly. So, and the prevalence of that is 1 in every 4. So 1 in every 4 children from infancy through to puberty. And so you pop a grommet, which is just really it allows air into that middle ear cavity, and that sorts that problem. Now, when puberty happens, the face gets a bit longer. The eustachian tubes no longer lie flat. They can drain a bit better, and you see the problem goes away. It reduces dramatically then after that.
And do grommets make that happen?
Yeah, well, grommets alleviate the difficulty
Yes.
that the blocked eustachian tube would, or the eustachian
Yes.
tube dysfunction.
So it is a thing today still that grommets do their job, and they're important.
Absolutely. It alleviates that glue ear situation. Yeah, for sure.
When I think about that noise thing again, and the noisy world we're in, can you have your hearing damaged in a one-off scenario with a shocking big burst of noise?
Oh, you can, definitely, because we have, like, I remember working in the north for years, and you would have seen it, I wouldn't say routinely, but you would have seen it very often. People that were caught in a blast and maybe eardrum perforated, but the nerve endings, you could see it after the eardrum was repaired naturally or otherwise. You could see that big chunk out of that spectrum and those high frequencies. And what happens is they still hear the volume of people, but they can't understand what they're saying.
Yes.
And that's the frustrating bit.
So that can be helped as well. Of course, you can help somebody who has damage like that due to a once-off incident.
It can. It depends on what's left. See, hearing aids are not a cure. We can only work with the residual hearing that's left. Hence, it's vital that people get it looked at early on. Because if you have 70% of your hearing left, then we can work with that, and you should get a reasonably good result. But if you have only 30% of your hearing left, that's a small amount to work with, and we just can't work as effectively as. So the more hearing you have, the better.
I want to take a short break. James is staying with me on the show. If you have a question, and we're going to come on to tinnitus now in a moment, because it's a big issue for many people. But if you have a question, 086 1800 658 by WhatsApp or text. James Clay from Connect Hearing is with us on Late Lunch. Let's talk tinnitus for a moment. What causes tinnitus?
Oh, tinnitus. Tinnitus is a strange one. It's very, very elusive. But the majority, well, let me just put it, back in the 1950s, two scientists, Heller and Bergman, took almost 100 people into a quiet room, and they were to report back. And these people had normal hearing. And the majority of them, up on 90% of them, reported that they had some noise in their head. And they deduced from that yes, in very quiet environments, even people with normal hearing will have some degree of tinnitus. So it becomes bothersome when very often it's the person's reaction to it. So unfortunately what happens is somebody will get this noise out of the blue, and they'll Google it, and they'll find out on Google that they end up the possibility of having a brain tumour, and they've only got 2 weeks to live, and then they become more anxious. But as your anxiety increases, it does a thing called increase in neural gain. So all the nerve endings are at a higher output. So all of a sudden this noise becomes greater. So the more anxious you become, the louder the tinnitus becomes, the more anxious you become at that, and so on and so forth. Tinnitus is really very often, very, very often, it's the sign that there is some degree of nerve damage in the inner ear. Now, whether that's within the normal spectrum, up to 8,000 hertz, or whether it's beyond 8,000 hertz, we can always check that out. If it's beyond 8,000 hertz, it would be looked on more as auditory deprivation, more than a hearing loss. So that's just something to be aware of. We do certain therapies to help people through that, and we can refer people in other directions as well. Excuse me. So again, it's on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Something like TMJ, that temporal mandibular joint disorder, that because there's so much pain with that tinnitus is also a symptom of that. But it's a thing called ephaptic transmission. The brain, that auditory cortex, takes up some of the energy, and the only thing it knows is noise. So it produces it as noise. So all of a sudden, would test their hearing, there's nothing wrong. If you go right out more than 8,000 hertz, there's still nothing wrong, but they still have this noise. So it's a symptom of something else. It's not a pathology itself.
Can it be cured?
Well, see, because it's not a pathology, there's nothing to cure. The analogy I'll give you, if you have a pain in your knee, it's not the pain you cure, it's the difficulty with the knee. And as a result of that, the pain subsides. So we have to look at what the most probable cause is with the tinnitus, address that, and then the tinnitus then should abate.
You can do it yourselves, or refer on, as you said, if it's necessary.
If it's outside of our scope, we'll know, and it all starts with a hearing test. When we do a hearing test, and we have an instrument called a tinnitus functional index, and we have the tinnitus handicap index as well, and these are psychometric tests that can take the subjective, which is the noise in your head, we can bring it down and put a score and compare it. And then we very much know with that and the hearing test then what the most probable angle is. And if it's not within our scope, we'll refer you on to whoever it is.
Just before we finish, it's important to say again, it's such a precious gift. One of the 5 senses are hearing.
And I know it firsthand, because back last February at 9:25, I was with a patient, and bang, my left ear just stopped. And there's raging tinnitus. It was a sudden sensory neural loss. It turned out it was a viral hit. I got on to the hospital at lunchtime. I had another audiologist with me, tested my hearing, tested it again the following morning. I saw ENT. I was on medication, steroids and antivirals, and in the space of about 5-6 days, thankfully it came back again.
Fantastic. So, you even, it was brought home to you, the preciousness of it. Connect Hearing.
Yes, we're here in the Mel in Drogheda. We're up there with a full-time clinic up there. There's a number of audiologists. Alison is steering the ship up there. We have also clinics in Donegal, and we have 3 clinics in Dublin as well.
Check them out, Connect Hearing. They're there to help. If you have any concerns, they'd be delighted to facilitate your needs. Thank you for joining me once more, James Clay, and wish you well.
Gerry, thank you.
Thank you.